G'day beautiful people, and welcome back to another episode of Brother Nature. Today we're going to crack on straight into it with part 2 of exploring the reef flats. For those of you who are patient and willing to take your time, you'll be rewarded by witnessing one of the most extraordinary creatures in the animal kingdom going about its daily business. The mantis shrimp here, despite being referred to as a mantis shrimp, isn't actually a shrimp at all, but a distant relative of crabs, lobsters and shrimps called stomatopods. A group which went their own way about 3 to 359 million years ago. The stomatopods, which we'll stick to calling mantis shrimps, are awesome, clever little critters that differ in quite a few ways, and have some remarkable traits which I'd love to share with you. Firstly, as you'll see in this photo, they carry their eggs underneath their thorax with funny little arms called maxillipeds, instead of with their swimmerettes underneath their abdomen like true shrimp and prawns. Mantis shrimps are split into two main types, that being either smashers or stabbers, referring to how they hunt and the weapons they use. As you'll see here on this Lisa's mantis, it's a stabber with those forearm-like claws known as raptorial appendages, or raps for short, having those long spines along them just like their namesake, the praying mantis insect, used for violently swiping fish out the water column as they pass by. Smashers, on the other hand, rely on their special shock-resistant calcified club-like wraps to inflict massive blunt force trauma on their prey like crabs and snails. You may find yourself wondering how they manage to be so insanely fast and strong. Well, it's a good question, and it's all due to this highly specialized mechanism in their wraps, which when unleashed generates a tiny cavitating bubble. For a tiny fraction of a second, that bubble becomes almost as hot as the sun, firing out a shockwave with devastating effect, and if by some miracle their prey doesn't get obliterated, at least they'll be stunned and concussed long enough for the mantis just to grab them. But unfortunately for this poor little checker-eyed mantis, that concussion backfired and led this crab to clench down on a bit of waste fishing line, leaving it unable to take its dinner home. A real shame, however, I did break it off and left it at the entrance to his burrow. So I could talk about mantis shrimp all day, there's that much interesting stuff about them, but we need to move on. So the last thing I'll mention is their eyesight, as it's phenomenal and said to be the most advanced vision on Earth. Mantis not only have independent trinocular vision in each eye for greater depth perception, but also the ability to see spectrums of light far exceeding our own, ranging from ultraviolet right through to far red and particularly polarized light. This allows them to track fast-moving prey in the worst conditions, day or night, careless of the depth, which quickly affects how light travels through water. Their eyes are truly amazing bits of kit, and I'd recommend reading further into it if you're interested. And of course, next time you're walking the reef flats, be sure to keep an eye out for them. It's well worth it. So you may recall in part 1 I was talking about venomous sea creatures and to be careful whilst picking. Well, this is a classic example. This is the fire clam, a little bivalve, and if you touch it, you will definitely burn. However, they are pretty. They're worth seeing. I'll tell you what, nature knows, we're off to a good start, as this character is a real fortunate sight you won't find very often at all. This is the pygmy pipefish, a close relative of seahorses, which you'll have to look really, really closely for. I usually find them in amongst the seagrass beds where they hunt tiny little almost invisible shrimp. But today, because I'm such a nice guy, I'm going to share a red hot tip of mine to increase your odds of finding them for yourself. And that is to pay particular attention to the depressions where stingrays have displaced sand whilst feeding. There you'll find the exposed root systems of the seagrass, which they're very fond of hanging on to and are exceptionally camouflaged among. So I think for both Mariella and I, the biggest joy we get from picking the reef is from finding nudie branches, or nudies as they're more affectionately known. They are just sea slugs, but I say that with hesitation because that's not at all the way we feel about it. Nudies are astonishingly beautiful little creatures that come in a phenomenal array of different colours and shapes. With over 3,000 species means it's very easy to find new species every time you pick the flats. And this day was no exception. So that last statement got me to thinking, how many have we actually seen? So I decided to jump on the hard drive where we've got all our photos catalogued and the videos and things. And we're approaching 350 identified species. So a bit over 10%. I'm pretty happy with that. But that certainly still leaves us with plenty more to find. relatively common on the tidal flats. I'm just obviously just cleaning up that silt, that mucus and slime off him. But that is a beautiful nudie branch. But what Mariella has spotted is this one over here, which I do not recognise. Oh my god! Yeah, it's pretty. Oh, we got here. It's another Plerio, but just the way he's positioned and his colour format is half amber, half liver colour. So there's usually two colour types. That's a pure liver colour like this with the white C rings, or the amber coloured like this one. But this is a bit of an intermediate cross blend of the two types, and that's a very, very pretty nudie branch right there. Yeah, that's the eyes there. Now they are still a nudie branch, but their gills are hidden down underneath this mantle. Very pretty nudie. For those of you who follow my channel, you've probably figured out by now that I really like my venomous and poisonous creepy crawlies. Well, nudies are no exception, as many of them are either poisonous venomous or doing a really sneaky job of faking it. This guy is one of those fakers. It's the flatworm Discodoris, and it's learnt a really cool trick. That's being to almost perfectly imitate a foul-tasting flatworm, which every predator on the reef has learnt to ignore, obviously leaving it to go about its daily business completely unhindered. As you can see from this purple dye in the water, this blunt end sea hare is not a faker at all, and it's a species you're actually likely to encounter, and they've got a brilliant dual defense system. Firstly, they'll start off with the warning of the purple dye, which has a toxin that floods the attacker's olfactory sense, meaning it completely overtakes the attacker's sense of smell, giving it an extremely inedible, bad taste and odour. Secondly, and if by some chance that doesn't convince its predator to leave it alone, it also has a combination of the ability to produce vast volumes of slime-like mucus, making it incredibly difficult to manipulate, but then also toxins within its tissues, making it taste even more obnoxious, the same way your garden variety slug does with ants. For rather docile, innocent-looking creatures, they're actually pretty genius, as the bulk of them have learnt to utilise toxins from what they feed on. You see, nudies eat a variety of really poisonous sponges and stinging hydroids. Most nudies are safe to touch, but there are also groups that aren't. Thankfully, however, they do tend to be obvious, with little appendages called serrata, kind of like tentacles of a jellyfish. These nudies take those stinging cells and toxins they eat and store them in nematocysts that, when touched, fire out minuscule harpoons injecting the venom. And take it from Mariella, they definitely hurt, as she unfortunately has an uncanny knack for accidentally touching them when we're diving. If they're not poisonous, venomous, or faking it like those fancy coloured ones you've just seen that like to advertise the fact that they are toxic, they'll tend to be the complete opposite. There's also numerous nudies like this camouflage Platydoris that are very cryptic camouflage species that have a tendency to only come out at night or hide deep within coral structures to avoid predation, and to find those is one of the primary reasons we love our night picking. So nudies are a really big genre I could spend all day talking about. I might actually dedicate an episode in the future to them, but I want to run you through 3 little sort of attributes of groups of nudies that I'm particularly fond of. Firstly, as you can see here, these incredibly vibrant, bright orange Gymnodoris. The Gymnodoris group are nudies that eat others, so they patrol around the sea floor, and once they find a small nudie, they chase it down and just swallow it whole. Quite remarkable to see. Then we have the astonishingly beautiful Spanish dancer here with its flamenco skirt wafting in the current as Mariella stimulates it with her pointer. A species that's big, but then also carries little commensal species of shrimp, the emperor shrimp, which are stunning in their own right. Okay, I'll wrap nudies up, but here we have just one last one. My personal favourite, I think it has to be the most astonishing of them all in the ocean. This is the solar-powered nudie. Typically eats soft corals, but as you can see here, it has these serrata wafting gently around in the current. Well, that's where it gets its name, the solar-powered nudie. There its big solar panels. They support zooxanthellae, the same beneficial algae that corals have. Here they are, these little golden clusters. Well, they get a nice warm cozy home within the nudie. Yet the nudie benefits by the excess sugars they create, fueling it between these long journeys between its typical food of soft corals. If you ever get the chance to witness these, you are just going to blow out. They're just astonishing. Well, Nature Nutters, I certainly hope I've managed to get across and give you an appreciation for how much fun, interesting stuff can be found throughout the day. Well, I'll tell you what, if you reckon that's cool, just wait until you see what can be found at night. You see, it really turns on after dark because so many cool critters only come out for fear of being predated on during the day, meaning the reef flats really come alive with not just volumes of stuff, but a really diverse variety of life as well. So as you've seen, you get loads of fancy ambush predators such as the scorpion fishes and eels that all patrol for an easy feed delivered by the outgoing tide. But then you may also recall from earlier, I mentioned many more nudies and snails as well. Just like this little flamboyant character, the exceptionally rare brown-lined bubble snail. I think this is a pretty average name. If you couldn't see this right now, what would your mind conjure up for that name? I don't think it would be this. I think it deserves a better name. So once you finish hitting the like and subscribe, go down to the comments. I'd love to hear alternate names for this animal. And prior to us on this particular night picking the flats in Lockhart out at Portland Roads, I'd only ever seen 2 of these. And I mean, I've done a lot of diving, thousands and thousands of dives, in the hope of seeing these. Lo and behold, we get 2 in one night on the flats at Lockhart. A real true treat. He's gorgeous. So let's have a little look at his underside. He's not bringing coral with him. He's refusing to let go. Clinging on for dear life. Wow, great display of strength. Okay, I feel bad. Oh, there he goes. So that's the noise that attracts all the sharks.
Wow. What a gorgeous animal.
Now, Nature Nutters, here's another one of those species with a really crappy name. This is the Arsia abalone. Ars is in donkey. I think it's a pretty mediocre name. Hit those comments below and give us some better alternate suggestions for names, cool names for this beautiful animal. So I think it's pretty safe to say that this entire part's been building up to this moment, and that is my favourite, the cephalopods. And picking the nighttime tide is by far the best thing. The cephalopods in the range that we got on this night were really, really good. Starting off with this beautiful banded string arm octopus, a rare species that gives you these fleeting moments, as you can see here. So I think we can all agree the octopus's ability to squeeze into a tight spot is second to none. But with their thin build, the banded string arm takes it to the next level. From the moment I released it from the net, this one immediately sent its arms out in search of a burrow to hide, and as you've seen, managed to find an absolutely tiny hole to disappear into, using its flexibility and intelligence to quickly conceal itself. Cephalopods utilise their unique ability to not only change their skin colour, but its texture, using special cells called chromatophores, giving them extremely excellent camouflage. So you might be aware that octopuses have 3 hearts, but do you know why? A lot of people simply think it's to run 8 arms, and in part that's true, but it's not as straightforward as that. You see, they don't have red blood like ours. Theirs happens to be blue because instead of being iron-based and having hemoglobin, theirs is copper-based with hemocyanin, as you can faintly see in the arms of this little pajama squid giving off that bluish colour. Now that's not a big deal, apart from the fact that it is slightly less efficient, and that's why they need those 2 extra hearts to increase it to a higher pressure to push it out to their extremities. And nature knows I really can't encourage you enough to get out at night, not just in the hope of seeing these little pyjama squids for yourself, but also their relative, the bobtail. Really super cute, awesome chromatophores, lots of colour changing, just a delight to play with. Now this particular treasure is the starry night octopus, a species you're actually highly likely to encounter on the cresting reef flats, spotlighting, particularly at night, but also during the day. This is a species that can come out quite a bit during the day. I'm particularly fond of this bit of footage because this is a male here. You may well notice at the front there's that little funny stumpy arm. Now that's meant to be like that. You may be mistaken for thinking that that's a regrow arm, that he's lost it at some point, but no, it's a highly modified arm, specially designed to deliver a sperm package to the female during the mating process. Now I'll take a moment and we'll see a female so you can compare that all her arms are of pretty standard size. Starry night octopus, because you'll notice the webbing between his legs particularly is a bit cosmos-like. He's just going to cruise around and blanket each one of these rocks in the hope of finding a crab sheltering underneath. Unfortunately, the bulk of the cephalopods can be very shy and will flee on sight, but thankfully starry nights are one of those species that's quite approachable. They'll generally allow you to interact with them, and that's what I really love about them. As you've seen, this one happily accepted my little crab offering and continued hunting without any concern of the giant looming over her. Now she'll start dismantling it by first removing the claws, then the legs, and she'll finish the job by cracking the top of the carapace, leaving body parts strewn across the flats. Here's another specimen we found that had scored itself a substantial size feed, which is quite interesting because, as you'll see, it continues to hunt for more treats as it slowly drags its primary meal back to its den, whereby she can dine in comfort with security. You'll come to recognise their dens the more often you pick the flats. The dens are littered with the discarded remains of their prey and larger fragments of coral rubble they've excavated from their burrows, which they often use as lids to prevent predators like moray eels from taking advantage. Eels definitely pose the greatest threat, as they too are very capable of squeezing into tight spaces. They'll happily dine on an octopus arm, which they'll bite down on with razor-sharp teeth, which you'd liken to broken shards of glass. The eel will then go into a death roll that effortlessly twists the arm right off, and you'll often find octopus with several parts or entire limbs completely missing. Now, for those of you that are really observant, you may have noticed our girl here had one of her rear arms hanging on by the slightest bit of connective tissue, which will have been from such an encounter. So I realise that sounds terrible, but they really do cope surprisingly well. It's just another one of those ingenious traits of the cephalopods, and that's that ability to regenerate and grow back any missing limbs. It's something you'll see frequently, like in the case of this poor little algae octopus, which had had half its arms stolen. I'd go as far as to say that only 10 to 20% of octopuses that you'll find will have all 8 perfectly formed original arms. Well, Nature Nutters, unfortunately that brings us to the end of another episode. I certainly hope you enjoyed picking the reef flats. We had a blast producing it. And I certainly hope that we've earned your subscription today. Be a legend, smash those buttons below. That way you won't miss part 4, where we explore more of the beautiful endemic wildlife of the Iron Range. And don't forget, come see more, be more and do more with Brother Nature.